The city seemed suspended in time, enveloped by a deep silence, while dense gray clouds hovered above, as if nature itself shared in the morning. In the cemetery, among the old gravestones, the residents dressed in black were silent, their faces marked by sadness. They had gathered to say goodbye to Maria, a woman who had brought light and warmth to the community. The mood was heavy, and the absence of sound, apart from the gentle murmur of the wind, made the atmosphere even more melancholy. Father Miguel, a robust and usually serene figure, seemed somber today. Dressed in his dark vestments, he led the ceremony with soft words, but his face reflected an unusual tension. The speech was appropriate, comforting, but something in his eyes suggested a greater weight, a secret perhaps, pressing down on him as he spoke about Maria's life. Meanwhile, among those present, a brown-haired mongrel dog called Phil walked silently. Phil was known to everyone, always faithful to Maria, accompanying her on her comings and goings around the city. At that moment, he seemed to absorb the sadness emanating from the people, moving almost solemnly between the legs of each person. But something in his expressive eyes seemed different. The dog, although calm, showed a slightly unsettling demeanor, as if he sensed something that the humans there couldn't feel. Phil stopped suddenly, fixing his eyes on Maria's coffin, and for a moment, everything around him seemed to slow down. The weight of the moment was palpable, and the dog, in his stillness, seemed to be carrying more than just the pain of loss. Father Miguel's gaze briefly met Phil's, and for a moment, something flashed across his eyes, a mixture of surprise and fear? Fear? The cemetery, the residents, the priest, and Phil. Everyone there was connected by a deep mourning, but also by something darker, something that had not yet been revealed. The heavy silence of the funeral is suddenly broken by a sharp, unexpected sound. Faithful, the mongrel dog, who until then had been wandering calmly among those present, stops abruptly in front of Maria's coffin. His eyes, fixed on the object in front of him, seem to carry a growing tension. Then, without warning, he lets out his first bark. A low, hesitant sound, but it soon turns into a series of frantic barks. The shocked residents look at each other, trying to understand what is going on. The solemn and respectful atmosphere is abruptly broken by the dog's agitation. "What's gotten into him?" asks a woman, her voice quivering with discomfort. Phil doesn't stop. His barks gain strength, almost as if he were trying to say something that no one else could understand. He barks with such intensity that it seems as if the message is urgent. His attention is fixed on the coffin, as if something inside is wrong. Each bark reverberates through the cemetery, echoing between the silent tombstones, generating a wave of unease among everyone. "I wonder what that dog wants," mutters someone in the crowd, now made up of apprehensive and curious faces. Father Miguel, visibly disconcerted, tries to restore order. "Quiet, please," he says, his voice sounding more forced than usual. "It's just the pain of loss that affects everyone in different ways, even the animals." But the priest's words are not convincing. Phil continues to bark, insistent, disturbing. It's as if he knows something that the others can't see. The tension in the air increases by the second, and what was once a silent funeral now turns into a scene of confusion and anxiety. The discomfort is palpable. Those present exchange glances, some with fear, others with curiosity. "Why doesn't he stop?" asks a trembling voice. Phil doesn't give up. His barking intensifies, focused directly on the coffin, as if he were defying the silence, trying to reveal something that shouldn't be hidden. And at that moment, something changes in the air. It's not just an agitated dog. There's a sense that this animal is sensing something much deeper, something dark and unsettling. The funeral ceremony, once so full of mourning and respect, is now plunged into uncertainty and fear. Phil, Maria's faithful friend, seems to be the only one capable of seeing the truth behind the farewell. In the midst of the commotion caused by Phil's incessant barking, a man no one knew approached the crowd. Carlos, a stranger passing through the town, was attracted by the commotion when he heard the barking from afar. His attentive gaze observed every detail of the scene, as if trying to understand what was upsetting the dog so much, and now, the residents. The whispers among those present grew louder, and the discomfort was evident. Mrs. Mendez, an elderly woman known for her superstitious beliefs, approached slowly. "That dog is seeing something we can't see. Animals always know, they sense what lies beyond," she murmured with wide eyes as she squeezed the arm of whoever was closest. His comment, although whispered, echoed through the crowd, planting the seed of fear. Carlos moved even closer, observing Phil's behavior closely. Something was clearly out of the ordinary. The dog wasn't just barking at the coffin, but seemed to be struggling to alert everyone to an invisible danger. The man narrowed his eyes, his brows furrowed in concentration. There was something in that situation that didn't make sense, and he, unlike the others, seemed willing to find out what was hidden. "Who is he?" an unfamiliar voice said in the middle of the commotion, referring to Carlos. But no one answered. Everyone was hypnotized by the growing tension around the coffin. Meanwhile, Father Miguel, visibly annoyed, tried futilely to calm the dog. "Please, someone get that animal out of here. This is a funeral." His voice was firm, but his countenance betrayed a slight desperation. He took a few steps back, as if he wanted to distance himself from the chaotic scene. Carlos, ignoring the priest's annoyance, bent down towards Phil. "What are you trying to say, boy?" he muttered to himself, without waiting for an answer. The tension in the air was palpable, and the dog's behavior was beginning to raise more questions than answers. Dona Mendez, now standing next to Carlos, murmured in a trembling voice, "Dogs are messengers. They sense what we can't see." Carlos looked at the old woman for a brief moment, considering her words. There was an uncomfortable truth in them, something he couldn't ignore. Phil continued to bark, his behavior increasingly disturbing. Carlos, now intrigued, realized that the dog wasn't agitated for no reason. Something in or around that coffin was wrong. Determined to dig deeper, Carlos took a step forward, sensing that the tension was far from accidental. Something dark was hanging over that funeral, something he couldn't ignore. The collective curiosity was growing. The residents could no longer hide their uneasy looks, and the idea that something really wrong was happening was beginning to settle in every mind present. Carlos felt the weight of those expectations, but also a growing unease in his chest. The story was yet to unfold, and Carlos knew that somehow he was now part of it. Carlos felt a growing pressure in his chest, as if the air around him was heavier. Phil's incessant barking was no longer just a disturbing noise. It was a call. Something was deeply wrong, and he knew he couldn't let it go. The stranger took a few more steps forward, approaching Maria's coffin, while the resident's eyes followed his every move expectantly. Dona Mendez, still by his side, murmured quietly, but her voice sounded like thunder in the midst of the tense silence. "The dog knows. He knows what the city has hidden. He's trying to warn us." His eyes shone with a mixture of fear and superstitious certainty. Carlos looked at Father Miguel's face, which was now struggling to keep its composure. His once serene countenance was broken, and drops of sweat were forming on his forehead. He clutched his rosary tightly, as if it were the only thing keeping him in control. But Carlos knew. The priest was on the verge of losing control. "Father," Carlos began, his voice firm, "there's something you're not saying." He watched the face of the priest, who hesitated before answering. "My son," said the priest, his voice trembling, "this is a time of mourning. We can't let an animal interrupt the peace that Mary deserves." But Carlos noticed the tremor in the priest's voice and the way he avoided looking directly at the coffin. Something was buried there, beyond Maria's body. Something the priest didn't want to come to light. The crowd began to murmur. The discomfort was palpable, and looks of suspicion spread among the residents. Fiel continued to bark, now so agitated that his body was shaking. He dug his paws into the coffin, as if he wanted to open the lid with his own strength. Carlos knelt down beside the dog, stroking its back to calm it down. "What are you trying to tell us, boy?" he whispered, more to himself than to the others. Mrs. Mendez stepped forward and, looking at the coffin, crossed her arms. Her face hardened. "The city has always had secrets, secrets that no one talks about, but that everyone knows exist. Maybe what's in this coffin isn't just a body." The priest was visibly shaken by the insinuation. His eyes darkened, and in a tone that sounded more like a plea than an order, he tried to end the discussion. "Please, this is blasphemy. Don't disturb the peace of the dead." But his words fell on deaf ears. The villagers now looked at each other with mutual suspicion, as if they were all involved in something bigger. The mystery in the air was suffocating, and Carlos felt he was about to discover something that would change the life of that town forever. He moved closer to the coffin, his heart beating faster. Fiel's bark echoed like a grim warning, while the mystery surrounding Maria began to reveal itself, silently, in the troubled expressions of those who were there. Whatever was buried, Carlos knew it wasn't just Maria's body. Fiel wouldn't give up. Her barking, which had previously only caused discomfort, now seemed almost deafening, a clear indication that something was wrong. Carlos, his heart racing, decided he couldn't put it off any longer. He approached Father Miguel, who now seemed to be on the verge of collapse. "Father," said Carlos, his voice firm, "no more hiding what's going on here. What's really inside that coffin?" The priest hesitated, his face pale and his eyes wide, unable to hold Carlos's gaze. He seemed about to collapse under the weight of the truth. The murmurs among the villagers were now loud and clear. Everyone wanted to know what the dog was trying to warn them about. Dona Mendez, her eyes full of suspicion, whispered something about sin, and the truth finally coming out. Carlos took another step forward, his voice now more incisive. "Maria isn't there, is she? What are you hiding?" Father Miguel took a deep breath, as if he was about to confess a very old sin. He stared at the coffin for a long moment, his hands trembling slightly. She's not in the coffin," he finally murmured, his voice almost a whisper. The impact of his words was immediate. A deathly silence overtook the cemetery, and the residents' eyes, once filled with tears of grief, were now wide with shock and disbelief. "What?" Carlos said, almost in disbelief. He knew something was wrong, but the confirmation that Maria wasn't in there was much more than he had anticipated. Father Miguel looked like a defeated man. His hands, still holding the rosary, slowly fell to his sides. "I had no choice," he continued, his voice heavy with guilt. "Maria, she made mistakes. Mistakes that no one could forgive. She knew too much, and there were powerful people involved. To keep peace in the city, to protect all of us, we made a deal. What you see here is a lie." Faithful, as if he understood the dark revelation, gave one last sad bark, more like a lament than a warning. He looked at the priest with eyes full of a melancholy that seemed to carry the pain of betrayal. Carlos, incredulous, demanded more. "What mistakes? What are you talking about? What did Maria know?" Father Miguel shook his head, his eyes now filled with tears. "She knew too many things about the city's secrets, things that should never come to light. I tried to protect her, but her death was shrouded in mystery, and we kept it from everyone." The weight of the priest's words fell on Carlos like a shockwave. He knew that he was only just beginning to unravel the web of lies that surrounded that town. What else could be hidden? What did Maria know that was so dangerous that her own death was covered up? The residents were now agitated, restless. The funeral ceremony had turned into a field of dark revelations, and the fear in the air was almost palpable. No one seemed to know who to trust anymore, and Mary's name, once revered, was now shrouded in an even denser mystery. Carlos looked at the priest one last time, realizing that there was much more to be revealed. "It doesn't end here, Father. We still have many questions, and I will find the answers." Father Miguel bowed his head, knowing that the truth, previously buried with Maria, was about to be unearthed, and the consequences would be devastating. Fiel, standing next to Carlos, who was now silent, seemed to silently agree. The mystery was only beginning to unfold, and the truth behind Maria's life and death would be much darker than anyone could have imagined. Determined to find out the truth, Carlos decided he couldn't trust anyone else. The priest clearly knew more than he was willing to reveal, and the residents, now agitated, seemed as immersed in fear as he was. But Carlos knew that to understand what really happened to Maria, he would have to dig deep, unearthing memories that many would rather forget. Fiel's barking stopped, but the dog wouldn't leave Carlos's side, as if he knew his mission wasn't over yet. Together, they began to investigate the darkest corners of the city. Carlos went to the oldest residents, those who had known Maria since she was young. However, his questions were met with furtive glances and evasive answers. Maria was always a strong woman, but she kept things to herself. "Things that were none of our business," said an elderly woman as she clutched the rosary in her trembling hands. Dona Mendez, always observant, offered Carlos more than the others. "Maria got involved with powerful people who have controlled this town for decades. She knew too many secrets, and no one who knows so much about these people can live in peace." From then on, the investigation took a darker turn. Carlos began to hear whispers about shady deals between the town's leaders and Maria, about how she kept information that could destroy reputations and bring to light crimes buried in the past. But no one wanted to talk openly, and the silence of the residents was an almost insurmountable barrier. Faithful, as if guided by an almost human intuition, began to take him through streets and places that Carlos would never have imagined visiting. Sleepless nights passed as he immersed himself in memories of the city, trying to put together the pieces of an increasingly complex puzzle. It was on one of these nights, while Fiel was guiding him along a dark path near Maria's old house, that Carlos found something unusual: a box hidden under loose boards in the basement of the house. Inside were old papers, documents that revealed a much darker scenario than he had imagined. Maria had kept records of conversations, transactions, and compromising documents involving influential people in the city. There was evidence of bribes, blackmail, and even covert killings. Father Miguel's name appeared more than once in these documents, linked to decisions he had made to protect not only his faith, but his own reputation. Carlos knew that these documents not only explained Maria's death, but also showed the weight she had been carrying for years. She knew too much, and paying with her life seemed to be the price for keeping such dangerous secrets. As he read each document, the cold night wind blew through the open window, and the silence of the city seemed to scream at him to stop. But Carlos knew he was getting close. Fiel lay next to him, his eyes alert, as if he knew the worst was yet to come. With the knowledge in his hands, Carlos knew that the truth he would unearth would shake the foundations of the city. But now he was in danger too. There were powerful forces that would not allow this truth to come to light without a fight. And as he looked at the documents, Maria's figure seemed more alive than ever. No longer the kind-hearted woman the city remembered fondly, but a tragic figure who fought alone against a city steeped in secrets. With the documents in hand, and the truth slowly revealing itself, Carlos knew that Maria's fate and the city's secrets were all connected in a darker way than he could have imagined. Fiel, always by his side, seemed to sense that the final battle was near. Together, they headed towards what would be the end of this story. Carlos spent the night analyzing the papers. Every detail revealed more about the city's influential figures: businessmen, politicians, even Father Miguel himself. Everyone was involved at some level in a scheme of corruption, lies, and betrayal. And Maria had unwittingly become the guardian of these secrets. She knew too much, and that's what condemned her. At dawn, Carlos decided to confront the truth head-on. He couldn't keep it a secret any longer. He took the documents to the place where it all began, the cemetery. Under the cloudy sky, the atmosphere seemed just as full of mystery as before. But this time, Carlos knew exactly what he was about to discover. Phil walked silently beside him, as if the dog understood that the decisive moment was near. When they reached Maria's grave, Carlos felt a chill run down his spine. The place seemed colder, as if it still kept its secrets underground. Carlos got straight to the point. "Maria isn't here," he said out loud, as if speaking to the ghosts in the cemetery. She was betrayed by those she trusted, by the city she loved so much. But the truth won't stay buried. Little by little, the residents began to gather, attracted by Carlos's presence and the suspense that hung in the air. Father Miguel arrived soon after, his face pale and his gaze fixed on the ground. He knew he could no longer hide what he had done. "You're going to tell the truth, Father," said Carlos, his eyes fixed on the priest. "Or I will." Father Miguel, struggling with the weight of his guilt, sighed deeply. Maria didn't deserve what happened. She tried to fight the city's secrets. She tried to expose what she knew. But we feared that the chaos would spread. We did the unthinkable to silence her. His words came out with difficulty, as if each syllable was a confession he had never wanted to make. Carlos stepped forward, holding the documents in his hands. "All this here," he said, holding up the papers for everyone to see, "shows the real story. Maria was betrayed by those who swore to protect her. Father Miguel, the town leaders, all of you are to blame." The murmuring among those present grew, and the fear in the air turned to indignation. The truth, buried for so long, finally emerged. The villagers began to realize that everything they believed in was shrouded in lies. Faithful as ever, he remained by Carlos's side, watching everything with the same intensity as before. He knew that his mission was nearing its end, and with that, silence once again hung over the cemetery, but now laden with revelations. Carlos turned to the crowd, his eyes full of determination. Maria tried to protect them. She knew that these secrets could destroy the city, but you have to face them. Only then can this city have peace. The priest, with tears in his eyes, knelt before Maria's empty tomb. "Forgive me," he murmured, but his words were lost in the wind. The truth had finally emerged, but the cost of its revelation would leave deep scars in the city and in his soul. Carlos, now with the truth in his hands, felt a strange relief. The journey had finally come to an end, but the consequences of what he had unearthed were only just beginning to take shape. He knew that the city would never be the same again. As the cold wind blew between the gravestones, Phil, the dog who had been the key to everything, sat calmly next to Carlos, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Their mission was accomplished. The truth had been revealed.